So what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? What do you mean? What do you do? Often that means what you do as a professional and what your job is, what your profession, how you do it. What does that mean? Well, the reason I bring that up is, how'd you get there? How'd you get there? How'd you get there? Crane, you're repeating yourself. I'm doing it on purpose. Because I want you to think about that. How'd you get there? Now, you could be doing a number of things. And sometimes it's not called a profession, but it is your focus. Who put that on your heart? Who put that on your heart? Now you're getting annoying. Okay. But who did put it on your heart? For me, even before I truly came to Christ, God put what I do, nothing but truth, on my heart. Some would call it a calling. What is yours? Because you know that God knows you, He created you, He loves you, and you're worth it. He has a plan and a purpose for you. You're not an object. Keep that in mind. And what I hope and I pray is that we all understand as Americans that what makes that possible for us to use our gifts is freedom. I'm a big believer in it. Limited government, big believer in it. Founders understood that. And when somebody does work very hard, somebody in government shouldn't be saying something, and we're going to jump to cut 40, by the way. Someone in government shouldn't be saying something that undermines that. Undermines success and hard work. Because that actually will disincentivize it, especially if you are the leader of the free world, like it or not, the President of the United States, and you make a comment like this. Roll it.
If you've been successful, you didn't get there on your own. You didn't get there on your own. I'm always struck by people who think, well, it must be because I was just so smart. There are a lot of smart people out there. It must be because I worked harder than everybody else. Let me tell you something. There are a whole bunch of hard-working people out there. If you were successful, somebody along the line gave you some help. There was a great teacher somewhere in your life. Somebody helped to create this unbelievable American system that we had that allowed you to thrive. Somebody invested in roads and bridges. If you got a business, you didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen.
That's not a college freshman, or more appropriately, college sophomore, all knowing of nothing. No, that's the President of the United States, demonstrating his, in my estimation, complete ignorance. But he's advancing something that he believes in, and he's entitled to do that. His ignorance of what it means to be successful in private enterprise, or to be successful in general. It's never been a slam against people who have been there in the past to help you, mentors, or a system that allows you to use the roads that you pay for. I mean, the argument is, at best, infantile, and at worst, just asinine. I mean, that's the state. I mean, understand, it's not something I delight in, criticizing my president. But when he makes those statements, he is defending something that has failed because he is not pointing to its success. He's not pointing even to the promise. He's defending something that is really not even real. It's a straw man argument in the sense to say, because you believe in this, you didn't get there on your own. There was somebody who helped you, and it was the state that helped you. Now, I don't know where that factors in other than the fact that we pay for things that we use. And the only way we don't is if we have a progressive tax system that doesn't do it biblically in the sense of everybody having skin in the game and go 10%. No, we have a tax system that penalizes, progressive tax system, that penalizes people the more they succeed in the reward that they reap from the economic benefits of their good or service. And the state has made the justification, hey, we like to do that because there are a smaller number of producers that produce that much on that scale, and therefore we can enhance our own power by giving goodies and favors to others, exploiting the oldest, or one of the oldest, certainly 10th commandment, envy of others. And it's just awful. But that's what you're going to get when you have a full frontal view of statism. Now, I'm being direct and I'm drilling down, folks, because the time for, we'll massage it. Well, we never have done that. We're going to tell it like it is. And a great example of how it is articulated and illustrated and seen in President Obama's 2015 budget. Our guest is the Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, Pete Sepp, joins us now. Hey, Pete, how are you?
I'm hanging in there, sir. How are you?
Well, I know, just for a little background, Pete has made time to be with us. We've had a situation where he is out in the field. Let's just put it that way, because the Metro has not worked properly.
And it's taxpayer subsidized. Remember that.
There you go. Hey, Pete, you can agree, disagree, or just move forward. The comment I made regarding the you didn't build that. That is the whole premise of more government, and for a progressive tax system that is already disproportionately big time taking from the top 1, 5, 10, 20% in the federal tax bill. Your thoughts on the mentality, because I look at that old statement, campaign statement, as what we are seeing pronounced in President Obama's 2015 budget. It's all politics and it's exploitation of envy and specifically class warfare. Your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. It's an excess of envy. I mean, we have to remember the historical context in which this budget is being presented. He has proposals in there for things like new limits on itemized deductions. He has proposals for new types of clawbacks, takeaways from corporations as well as other job creators. All of these things are coming on top of what has been a major ramp up in taxes, not only on the top 1%, but on the top 5 and 10% that you mentioned. We have to remember that the top tax rate went from 35% to 39.6% in early 2013. New surtaxes as a byproduct of the Affordable Care Act took effect in 2013. Those are now showing up on 2014 tax returns. By the way, thanks to a bunch of problems with the government shutdown and the IRS not getting its act together, we all had to wait until the end of January to begin filing. We won't know the results for sure, but I think that after a month, maybe 5 weeks of tax filing season underway, a lot of small business owners who find themselves in that top 1% of taxpayers are finding that they owe a lot more than they expected. And that's going to show up with downstream effects on job creation, new business starts, investment in plants and equipment, all of these things. And it's all starting with more budget proposals to heap higher taxes on America. The one takeaway from this, and we could spout numbers all night here, but the one thing I'd like for folks to remember is in the deficit reduction portion of President Obama's budget, for every dollar of spending he claims to cut in order to bring the deficit down, he would raise taxes by $5. Does that sound like a balanced approach to deficit reduction? Especially since we've been raising taxes throughout 2013? I don't think so.
You mentioned the fact that business owners, small business owners, are going to be impacted by this, to say the least, and really realizing and recognizing their tax bill because of deductions and a whole host of things that you've cited. So this will not enhance the so-called recovery that we are having. It seems the only thing that really we saw spur a recovery was the government shutdown and sequester. Am I wrong?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that, of course, has been abandoned. This is the ironic thing in President Obama's budget. There is an acknowledgement, at least, that for some reason the federal deficit was coming down from its $1.3 trillion high just a couple of years ago. Why in the world is it now prepared to dip closer to $500 billion? Well, it's evident in President Obama's own budget tables. You can see a drop in discretionary federal spending for 2 years running. It is the first time that has happened since the Korean conflict. Why did that happen? Thankfully, we had spending caps in place for those 2 years due to the Budget Control Act of 2011. What happened to that act? It was basically swept away by an agreement of Congress and the president late last year. The president is already saying that the 2-year hiatus that those caps took, in other words, they suspended them for fiscal years 2014 and 2015, well, he doesn't want them to ever come back, and his budget proposes to get rid of them permanently. There goes any shot at decent deficit reduction over the next 8 or 10 years. In fact, what is he replacing it with in order to keep the deficits down? Just what I was mentioning, higher taxes at a ratio of 5 to 1.
So, in essence, we jump up government spending, right? And it's claiming that, hey, that's because of the crisis that we're in. We need the state to take more money and redistribute it. Much like the idea of the state going and being at the pool. The state's a kid and has a pail, goes to the deep end, fills it up with water, and then stumbles down to the shallow end and pours it in and says there's more money into the economy. That's the premise, in essence. That's what we have to look at, and that's what they claim to do. They say they're going to inject money and demand into the economy. They're going to make sure the people who are hurting and need are taken care of. That's safety net. That's another component of it. But Keynesian economics is, in essence, to stimulate demand, and that will grow business because there will be more money, and people will say, hey, people are spending, I'm going to add a job, because the reason people go into business is to create jobs. No, actually it's not. It's to produce a good or a service, and jobs are a result of that. And I'm getting to the question here, Pete, and that is this economic philosophy that we see, that the president continues. He, in essence, said emergency spending, plugged it in, put it in at a higher level, and rather than to return to where the government should be, he's going to keep it at a higher level and have tax increases pay for it.
Yes, absolutely so. And you can tell this in a number of ways. In fact, his own budget estimates wildly conflict with that of the Congressional Budget Office. Take a look at the end of the budget window, the year 2024. The Congressional Budget Office is saying that the federal deficit will be over $1 trillion at that point. President Obama's budget is saying it'll be closer to half that amount. What is the difference? Three things. He is assuming that the economy will grow dramatically faster than the Congressional Budget Office is assuming. He believes that a combination of immigration reform, some of his tax reforms, and some of his spending reforms will make the economy grow faster. He's already assuming also that the federal government will be taking in about $500 billion more in revenue a year by the end of this budget scoring window. Finally, he's assuming that because the economy will be humming along thanks to his policies, there will be less need for things like unemployment benefits and food stamps. So suddenly, zippo, you have a budget deficit that's only about $500 billion instead of twice that much, which is what the Congressional Budget Office is saying. This is fantasy.
Has it worked in history, Pete? Have we seen ever?
No.
Okay,
I mean,
well, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? You know the type of budgeting. People go, hey, FDR, those programs got us out of the Great Depression. I mean, this kind of philosophy works.
Well, there are several historical things to remember here. Number one, the U.S. economy was not humming along very well during the late 1930s when the New Deal was in full effect. That's because tax rates were rising and government spending was growing. It took, unfortunately, World War II to start lifting us out of the economic doldrums that we continue to experience despite New Deal policies. What helped us get out of other economic binds? Well, back in the late 1990s, for example, we experienced an economic boom after a recession that began in the early 1990s because, one reason, Bill Clinton signed into law a capital gains tax rate reduction along with other tax relief and agreed with congressional Republicans to reform the welfare system, slow the growth of other federal spending programs. That was a lower, less government package that helped to boost the economy. That happened during the Reagan years, at least in his first term. It happened during the Kennedy years when John F. Kennedy proposed tax rate reductions. Unfortunately, he did not live long enough to see those enacted, but once they were, the economy took off, so did employment growth.
Pete, one thing I want to zero in on is the engine of growth, innovation. We don't have a finite economic pie. President, obviously, I think there's a belief that there is, and he can divide it and then redistribute and make sure everybody gets their fair share. Thank you to him becoming the Minister of Fairness. That said, when we look at the engine of growth, we have to look at capital, money being able to be invested into those with ideas. We've seen a very top-down, centralized approach, and we've seen this even manifest itself in its hubs of the partnership between the government and the private sector. What's the history of that, and what happens when you choke off the ability to invest?
Well, when you choke off the ability to invest, a lot of things happen, and some of them are intuitive. If you have less capital to invest in businesses, they're not going to have the capital to, in turn, grow their product lines, install new machinery, provide more services. What does that translate into? That translates into fewer jobs. And when you have fewer jobs, you have fewer taxpayers in the economy. One ironic result of that, of course, is that federal revenues actually start to decline. And this is sort of the paradox that raising tax rates does not necessarily mean raising tax revenues. Now, the same thing can happen on the spending side of the ledger. When government directs resources away from their most productive, profitable uses, in other words, when government says, we don't care what preferences consumers have or what investors have or what business owners have, we're going to make sure, for example, that there is a whole system of tax credits, loan guarantees, federal spending programs to subsidize green energy. What is the result of that? He is not meeting his goals to achieve job growth in the green energy industry, as President Obama promised. He's falling millions short of the jobs he said would be created. We are not experiencing the kind of economic growth from green energy that we thought we would. In fact, the growth in the energy industry we are experiencing is coming from natural gas and oil because we've discovered new technologies for their extraction, and we are becoming a net energy exporter.
And the one place where he spoke to reform as he was a candidate and is our entitlements. That's the elephant in the room. What's the movement there?
Absolutely very well. There is some movement here in trying to get some Medicare costs under control. That would be primarily achieved through President Obama's budget by means testing. In other words, if you want to participate in the Part D supplemental insurance program, Part D drug prescription benefit program, or if you want to participate in Part B, the supplementary medical insurance program, if you have a certain amount of income, you're going to have to pay more in premiums for that. We see very little else in the way of reform other than the traditional let's fight waste, fraud, and abuse and enact program integrity measures. In fact, one of the most destructive provisions of his budget would take Medicare in a backward direction by requiring more forced payments from drug manufacturers called rebates to prop up the program. These are not rebates in the sense that consumers get more money in their pockets. They are rebates in the sense that government gets more money in its treasury. More money out of the productive private sector means, again, less money to invest, less money going to the preferences of consumers and investors.
Pete Sepp, Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union. Thank you. Thank you for making time for us tonight. The answer is freedom and not envy. And we've got a lot of envy and more or less freedom. Pardon me. Thank you so much. Live with honor in your life, compassion in your heart. Always keep the faith in Jesus Christ. Go to the Facebook page, Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, AFR Talk.